Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our Benny's Bat section for today, Wednesday, July 22nd. The idea of this segment is for us to kind of go through the pitching options that we have on the day and outline what the weaknesses that each pitcher has and figure out which bats on the other team are profiled to do the best against the weakness that that pitcher has. So if we have a pitcher who struggles against right-handed bats with power, we want to figure out which guys on the other team are the right-handed bats with power that basically are in the best spot to do well today. The first guy we're going to talk about today is Kevin Gausman from the Baltimore Orioles. He's been struggling with left-handed bats this year who are hitting 340 against him, and he goes up against the New York Yankees. Now, the Yankees are a team that I think you can stack today. They have quite a few guys from the left side who profile to do well against a guy like Gausman. You have Mark Teixeira, who has a 396 WOBA with a 330 ISO number. So he's a guy who should be able to get some hits and can provide some power for you today from the first base position. You got a guy like Brett Gardner, who's 377, 177. Doesn't have a ton of home run power, but he is a guy who's been getting a lot of hits, getting on base. He can steal a couple bases for you. His price has come up, so you're not getting the discount that you were getting earlier in the season on him, but that doesn't mean he's still not in a good spot today. Jacoby Ellsbury's back. He's batting 319 this year against right-handed pitching, so he's a guy that's in line for a couple hits. And you also have a guy like Brian McCann, who has a 351 WOBA with a 221 ISO number. So he's another guy who has a little bit of power and can get that home run for you. Again, none of these guys are really all that cheap today on any of the sites, but they are a good team and a good group of guys that you can put together. The four that we mentioned are going to be four of the top five guys in the order. The other guy who we didn't mention is Alex Rodriguez, and he's actually, even though he's a right-handed batter, he's actually hitting pretty well against right-handed pitching this year as well. So all five of those guys could be in play today for the Yankees. Next guy we can talk about is Mike Pelfrey. Pelfrey has allowed a higher batting average over the last couple of years to right-handed bats. So he's a guy that has what we like to call reverse splits. And that's really tough for him today because there's a couple guys on the Angels who are right-handed bats that hit very well against right-handed pitching. The two guys that really stand out are Mike Trout with his 419 WOBA and 297 ISO number, and also Albert Pujols, who has a 394 WOBA and a 307 ISO number. Pujols has 3 home runs in his last 3 games. He's seeing the ball well. He's hitting the ball extremely well. And with Trout hitting in front of him, he does get a lot of opportunities to drive in runs. So I definitely think this is a good matchup for Pujols here today against a guy like Pelfrey. And I also really like Trout, who got the day off yesterday. So if there's nothing with injury and it was just a routine day off, I think it's going to be safe to roll Trout out again today, which I think is the case because they did have a doubleheader the other day. So I think they were just giving him a day off after playing both halves of that doubleheader. Let's see. The next guy we can talk about is Felix Doubront. Felix Doubront used to pitch for the Red Sox, but now he's on Toronto, for those of you who don't know. And he's going up against Oakland today at home in Toronto in the Rogers Center, which is a good hitter's ballpark. Now, he's really struggled with right-handed bats throughout his career. Doubrant's a lefty. He's allowed 23 home runs and 170 pitches since 2013. I'm sorry, 170 innings pitched since 2013 to right-handed bats. There's not a ton of right-handed bats that you really love on this Oakland team, but two guys that kind of stand out are Josh Phegley. The catcher has a 387 WOBA with a 242 ISO number. So that's really, really good batting that he's doing against left-handed pitching this year. And when you move him up into the Rogers Center, which is a good hitter's ballpark, he's getting a big park bump moving from Oakland. I definitely think he's somebody that you can look at today. His price has been pretty cheap. He's been in like the $3,200, $3,400 range on DraftKings, below $3,000 on FanDuel. Over on Aces, I think he's 41 or 4,200. So he's definitely somebody that you can look at for the early slates for your catching position. The other guy who's been pretty hot lately is Billy Butler. He's got 2 home runs in his last 3 games. His WOBA and ISO numbers aren't great, but he is a professional hitter. He's somebody who, always makes contact. I think he's very cash game safe for this game. Again, he's a right-hander going up against a left-handed pitcher who struggles with guys from the right side. So I think he's another guy you can look at if you're looking for a salary-saving option at first base. Moving on from there, we can talk about Charlie Morton from Pittsburgh. He's going up against Kansas City today. He struggles with left-handed bats. They have a higher batting average over the last couple of years against him. A couple left-handed bats you can look at on that Kansas City team. Kansas City doesn't have a lot of home run power, but they do have a lot of guys that can rack up some hits. More cash game plays to me than tournament options usually. But a guy like Mike Moustakas has a 384 WOBA, 162 ISO number against right-handed pitching. So he's somebody that could be in line for a couple hits. Will probably be batting second in the order, and somebody that I think you should look at. Next guy is Alex Gordon. Gordon is a little bit more of a power guy. He's got a 374 WOBA with a 184 ISO. Usually hits around fifth or sixth in that order, so he's somebody else that I think could be in play today. And you can look at a guy like Eric Hosmer, who's starting to get his stuff together again. He's a 370 WOBA, 158 ISO number, so he doesn't have the home run power that you really like out of a first baseman, but he is somebody that can get you a couple hits. He's been known to steal a couple bases every now and then as well. So there's definitely some upside with using a guy like Hosmer today. All of these lefty bats for the Kansas City Royals are going to be in play. But again, I like them more if I'm trying to find a guy that I need to fit in salary-wise for a cash game, because they don't really have a ton of upside. They're not a big home run hitting team, and this isn't exactly the greatest ballpark for for them to be hitting home runs out of either. So just temper your expectations with some of those Royals bats. Next guy we can talk about is Ivan Nova from the Yankees. He hasn't been all that good this year. Left-handed bats have a higher average against him over the last 3 seasons. This year, he's allowed a 1.73 whip to left-handed bats, so he's really hasn't been getting any of them out, really been struggling with those left-handed bats. A guy like Jimmy Paredes might be somebody to look at for your infield spots. He's got a 353 WOBA and a 184 ISO number against right-handed pitching. Good matchup today against Nova. I think if he's hitting up towards the top of the order, usually in like that 2 or 3 hole, he's probably somebody that you want to look at. Catching options, Matt Waiters. He's got a 347 WOBA with a 194 ISO number. So that's pretty good for a catcher. Basically, his numbers are right around the numbers that we see from Brian McCann, just a tad below. But I do think he has a little bit of a better matchup today. And I think that Waiters could be one of those guys that goes a little bit lower owned. And, like I said, pretty much has the same kind of upside as a guy like McCann. And his price is a couple $100s cheaper on most of the sites that you're going to be playing on today. Last guy is Manny Machado. Now, Machado's not a lefty, but he's hitting he has a 385 WOBA with a 237 ISO number against right-handed pitching anyway. He's been very, very good this year, so there's really no reason not to use a guy like Machado. Like I said, Nova struggles more with lefties, but Machado's been good against everybody. He's on top of that order. He's got a lot going in his favor. That's why his price has come up so much. But again, this guy has gone from a solid player into basically a stud in this league. And, if you can fit him in your roster, there's really no reason to fade away from him. Next guy we can talk about is John Danks. Danks is a little bit of a gas can. Right-handed bats are hitting over 315 against him this year, and right-handed bats have pretty much beat him up over the course of the last couple years. Now, there's a couple bats on St. Louis. Don't be fooled by the fact that St. Louis's team stats against left-handed pitching is bad, because they do have a lot of lefties in that lineup, and they were playing without some of their biggest right-handed bats for a while. Guys that you can look at today, though, Matt Holliday is back. Had that big grand slam last night. He's got a 397 WOBA with a 178 ISO number. So he's one of those guys that they were missing for a while that can really hit left-handed pitching pretty well. And putting him back in the 3-hole in that order extends that whole lineup, makes everybody stronger from top to bottom, and makes it a much tougher matchup for left-handers. So even though left-handers have good numbers to date against St. Louis, I wouldn't, take that as gospel and go ahead and try to roster a guy like Danks tonight. Other guys you can look at, Randall Gierchuk's been hitting in the 2-hole for St. Louis when they go up against left-handed pitching. He has a 355 WOBA and a 231 ISO number, so the guy does have some power. Remember, he had 2 home runs the other night. Not that I'm expecting him to have another 2-home-run game anytime soon, but he does have the power to hit one out of the yard. He's in a good spot in the order, and his price is still pretty cheap all over the industry. So he's another guy that you might want to look at tonight. Last guy, shortstop Johnny Peralta. He's probably the top option at shortstop on the late slate. He's a guy that has some power. His ISO number is 275. His WOBA is 353 against left-handed pitching. So he is a guy that can take left-handed pitching yard. He has the most home runs against left-handed pitching on that St. Louis team. He's the big right-handed bat that usually finds himself hitting cleanup and doing a lot of the damage when they go up against a lefty. Next guy we can talk about is Wade Miley. Miley's going up against Houston today. Excuse me. There's a couple guys in that Houston team that really hit left-handed pitching well. But remember, that Houston team is very feast or famine. The 2 guys who I think you can use, whether it's a cash game or a tournament, are Carlos Correa with his 419 WOBA and 309 ISO number. I mean, this guy has been phenomenal since being called up. He's getting hits. He's hitting the ball out of the ballpark. He's stealing a couple bases for you. And at a shortstop position, that's very tough to fill. You know, he's a guy that I think you can just plug in there and be pretty confident that you're going to have one of the top scorers on the day at the position. Another guy you can look at, his buddy up the middle, Jose Altuve. Altuve's got a 367 WOBA with a 131 ISO number against left-handed pitching. Now, remember, last year, this guy hit over 400 against left-handers as well. So one thing that he can do very well is hit left-handed pitching. So we're going to be looking for a big game out of Altuve and Correa today. Now, there are a couple bats you can look at behind them, a lot of those right-handed bats. But remember, most of those right-handed bats are strictly power guys, meaning that they're very feast or famine. They could hit a home run for you, but they're also just as likely to strike out and really tank one of your rosters. Next guy we can talk about, let's see. Not picking on Edinson Volquez today. His strikeout numbers are down, but he's been pitching pretty well. Nobody really has a high batting average against him, right-handed or left-handed. And while I do like that Pittsburgh team, and they have been hitting pretty well lately, there's nobody that really stands out as having a great matchup against Volquez for me. Like I said, McCutcheon, probably one of the guys that have one of the higher WOBAs against right-handers. But still, he's not somebody who I think is in a great matchup today. So we're going to be skipping most of those Pirates bats. Same thing kind of goes for Miami against Robbie Ray. Robbie Ray's been great so far this year. Miami has a lot of left-handed bats now with all the injuries. I don't think you're going to see a guy like Bohr today. You'll probably see like a Baker or a McGee in there. Prado will be in at third base. You may see Dietrich, but again, it's not a good matchup for him either, lefty on lefty. Like I said, there's not a lot of guys I like. Maybe you can look at a guy like a McGee or a Prado if you're looking for somebody cheap. But, those guys don't really excite me. They're guys that if they fit in and I need a salary saver, maybe, but they're not somebody that I'm going to be targeting today. So I don't have a lot of Miami bats going up against Robbie Ray. Or Pittsburgh bats going up against Edinson Volquez to tell you guys about. Mike Montgomery from Seattle. He's been pretty solid this year as well. There's really only two guys on Detroit I think you can look at. Victor Martinez has a 449 WOBA against left-handed pitching with a 160 ISO number. So I definitely think that he might be somebody who's in play. Another guy you can look at if you need a cheap option at shortstop is Jose Iglesias. He's got a 426 WOBA, so he has a high batting average. He doesn't hit for a lot of power. He doesn't steal bases. He doesn't really do much else. But as a cheap salary saver, if you can find him somewhere that his price isn't too prohibitive, he could be somebody that you want to look at. The drawback with him is he usually bats low in the order, and I hate when he bats low in the order because, for fantasy purposes, that really hurts you. But the good thing is he will be low owned, so you might be able to get a couple hits out of him. Again, like I said, he doesn't have a ton of upside, though. He's not the guy that's going to hit you a home run. And I think you're going to be behind the eight ball if you use a guy like him versus a guy like Correa, who does have that home run power and the upside to put up a big score today. Let's see. We also have Colin McHugh going up against Boston. McHugh has allowed right-handed bats to hit 305 this year. But if you look at his stats, he usually struggles more with left-handed bats. He is a right-handed pitcher, so I'm thinking that left-handed bats is probably the way to go after him. If you look at the Boston team against right-handed pitching, there's two guys that really stand out. The first is Alejandro De Aza, 413 WOBA, 238 ISO number. He hit down in the order like 7th or 8th yesterday and picked up a couple hits. I'm really hoping that pretty soon they move this guy up in the order against right-handed pitching because he is definitely somebody who hits right-handed pitching pretty well. But if he's down in the order, I think he's a decent salary-saving flyer. If they move him up in the order, though, like to second hole where I think he should be against right-handers, he's definitely going to be somebody you have to consider. Even if they put him in a power spot, like maybe 5th or 6th, I think that really bumps him up into a guy that you almost have to play. Next guy I want to talk about, David Ortiz. Ortiz has a 381 WOBA with a 250 ISO number. Again, he's another guy that has that home run power, left-handed bat going up against McHugh. McHugh is a guy who, struggles with lefties in his career, although he's been tough on him this year. So I definitely think that Ortiz is probably the other guy you want to look at on that Boston team. Let's see. We got C.J. Wilson. Wilson has struggled with right-handed bats over the last 2 seasons. 255 batting average this year, 277 batting average last year. There's really only one guy that stands out for me on that Twins team to go up against them, and that's Brian Dozier. Dozier has a 365 WOBA with a 238 ISO number. And, basically the guy's got some pretty big home run upside from the right side of the plate against left-handed pitching. So he's somebody that I think you really want to look at. There's a couple other guys like a Trevor Plouffe maybe that you want to consider, but nobody really stands out on the numbers other than maybe Dozier on that team. Moving on, we have Anibal Sanchez. Sanchez is giving up higher batting average and more home runs, excuse me, to right-handed bats, although he has been giving up home runs to both sides of the plate. To me, that means the one guy who's really in play on Seattle, based on the numbers and just the profile of a hitter that he is Nelson Cruz. Cruz homered yesterday, has a 356 WOBA with a 196 ISO number. So he's somebody that does have the home run power to go yard against a guy like Sanchez. You could also look at guys like Cano and Seager. They don't stand out on the numbers. They haven't been having the best year, but they are two of the better players on that team and two of the better bats that they have against right-handed pitching. That pretty much sums it up for the guys that we're going to be targeting today. There are guys like Lance Lynn going up against the White Sox that I didn't mention. I don't want any of the White Sox bats. Jose Fernandez against Arizona. I don't think it's a good spot for a lot of those Arizona bats. We talked about Volquez already. We talked about Robbie Ray. Now, the one guy who I don't really know which way to go with it is Sonny Gray going up against Toronto. I really do like Sonny Gray. He's getting a huge park downgrade going into the Rogers Center, and he is facing one of the best hitting teams in the league. So I think that puts him in the category of a guy that I'm not going to be using today, but also not targeting a lot of bats against them. If you're looking for a contrarian play with upside for a tournament, I think if you have a stack of Toronto bats, they always have the opportunity to go nuts, and I think that could be something that winds up paying off for you. But again, I mean, Gray is a very good pitcher, so if he pitches well, he could neutralize them or at the very least keep them to maybe only 2 or 3 runs, and 2 or 3 runs is not going to help you win a tournament if you stack up a bunch of bats there. So those are just our ideas on pitching for tonight's late slate of games. There is also a set of games going off in about a little while from now. It's about 11 o'clock in the morning Eastern time over here. So there are some games that are going off in about an hour. As always, whether it's the late games or the early games, we'll be over in the rotocurve.com forums discussing any questions that you guys might have. If you haven't signed up yet, sign up for an account. It's free. And the more you participate, the more points that you'll earn. And you can trade those points in to get money on the sites or some RotoCurve swag so you can wear it outside. It's definitely a good deal. It doesn't cost you anything and helps you be part of a community that's, been helping each other win some money lately. So that's what it's all about. So thank you guys for joining us over here for Benny's Bat section at rotocurve.com. And as always, stay classy, DFS.